What's up, everybody? So I was sent a link to an article which led me down a deep dive into finding some documents to one of the wildest court filings I have ever seen in my life. It is something I've never seen. It's got new stuff I've never heard anybody argue in a case before. It was sent to me by Ashley Mary, who's a friend here on Instagram and a true crime enthusiast, and it deals with the Delphi case. The allegations made by Richard Allen's attorneys include cultist sacrifices by Odinists, which is a Norse cult group that brings me back to my Last Kingdom days, the Vikings, and the weird rituals that they did on that show. It is described in horrifying detail in these motions and these documents, over 100 pages, giving a deep dive background into this cult and how the crime scene was left from the people that committed this crime. It talks about how people in this cult are in multiple levels of law enforcement and people involved in this case and in the correctional facility. It literally reminds you of shows, I think The Happening or some show that was like about a cult and how people were in all levels of law enforcement throughout the city. It talks about law enforcement intentionally misleading judges and other people in the case, doing nothing for years with real information that it was somebody involved in this cult that committed these crimes, and potentially a very innocent man sitting in prison, living in what his attorneys have described as hell. One of the big questions is, what is a Frank's hearing, which is what his attorneys are trying to get, what Richard Allen's attorneys are trying to get at this point. And that is a hearing to prove that lies, false information, or intentionally misleading statements were given to the judge in support of a warrant. And therefore, everything that was found in that warrant, including the weapon, the firearm that connected Richard Allen to this case and is the big piece of evidence they have that we've talked about before, should be thrown out. And how you get that done in a Frank's hearing is based on a couple different factors. First, the affidavit had to state, or the affiant, the law enforcement officer, had to state something that he knew was false. And it was knowing and intentional that he gave this false information. Or he gave this information with reckless disregard for the truth rather than mere negligence. It wasn't an accident, but instead he did it on purpose or recklessly disregarding the truth. So knew or should have known it wasn't true. And by doing that, even if it was unintentional but done with reckless disregard, if the affidavit would have failed without those false statements, then the evidence found should be suppressed because all the remaining information would not have been enough for probable cause. And number three, the false or intentionally misleading statement was necessary to find probable cause. So if you needed that false statement to find probable cause, and we know that statement's false now and was intentionally made and given to circumvent this process appropriately, then maybe this information should be suppressed and they won't have enough to charge Richard Allen. Another major bombshell is literally statements made by law enforcement and former law enforcement that they have way more evidence connecting this cult group to these crimes than they do Richard Allen. There's so much for us to dive into. Let me know in the comments if you think we need a long form video on it, and like this video if you want to see that happen on YouTube.